Before I get started, I wanted to thank everyone for helping me get to 1,000 subscribers. I really appreciate everybody subscribing to my channel and liking my videos and commenting. At the time I was restoring my 65 Impala SS, I didn't have a YouTube channel and I wasn't making videos of all the work as I did it. I took a lot of pictures, so what I'm going to do is narrate over the pictures that I took to better help you understand what's going on in them. I want to show the entire 3-year restoration. I purchased my car from a man who had brought the car down from the north. It had spent most of its years in Philadelphia and Ohio. The car was in really rough condition when I bought it. It had metal work done on it that was done incorrectly, but it was a true SS. The story that he told was that the original owner of the car had passed away, and the grandson of the original owner had gotten the car. And the grandson was a young man who obviously did not know how to restore cars, and he started working on it. And as you can see, he welded body panels directly on top of the other body panels. He just did a really bad job. I guess when he realized he was in over his head, he sold the car. As soon as I got the car, I started work on it immediately. I started disassembling the front end of the car in preparation for removing the car from the frame so I could restore everything as I went. The odometer of the car said it had 83,000 miles on it. I did a vehicle history report and actually confirmed that it had records all the way back to 1968. The car had sat most of its life. Most of the miles that the car had on it was already on it by 1968 according to the records I found. The engine was incredibly original. It had been upgraded to a 4-barrel carburetor from a 1957 Chevrolet. The car also had aftermarket air conditioning. The car still ran with the original starter and alternator. Coming from the Northeast, the car had a lot of rust on it. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had never even repaired body panels before. I had to learn everything from scratch for this project. The trunk of the car had been cut out with a plasma cutter by the young man who had started to work on the car previously. Even the fuse box was rusty. This damage was caused where the cowl rusted out around the bottom lip of the windshield, which is very common on these cars. Still, some parts of the car were in incredibly original condition. Even the jacking instructions were still under the trunk lid for the limited slip differential. One of the worst problems with the car was the frame was rusted really bad on the passenger side below the passenger seat, which is a common problem with these 65 Impalas. Luckily, when I bought the car, it came with an extra frame. The man who sold it had already prepared to replace it. The new frame had already been painted, but the suspension work had not been completed. So I had to clean up all the upper and lower control arms and rear axle and rebuild the front suspension completely. I replaced all the rubber parts on the front and rear suspension and any wear components. I used the original 10-bolt positive traction rear end that came in the car. I went back with all the original drum brakes. Eventually I planned to change to disc brakes, but for cost reasons I went ahead and used the original drums. I did the frame swap completely by myself using only a floor jack and 4x4s and cinder blocks. It's really not that difficult. You don't really have to have a lift, although it probably would be nice. I did all the body work on the undercarriage while the frame was out. The engine had been sitting for at least 23 years that I knew of. Before I put it back in, cleaned it up, replaced all the gaskets, including the rear main seal. I ended up having to work on the oil pump because the relief valve in the oil pump was stuck and it was causing it to overpressurize. So I worked on that, got it all back together. I replaced the timing chain and all the external components. And then I painted the engine and made it look like new again. However, due to the low mileage, I did not have to rebuild the engine. It still runs good and doesn't burn any oil. After the engine was fully reassembled, I reinstalled it and the transmission back in the car. Due to the rust that was on the lower cowl of my car, under the fender where the fender attaches, and the rear quarter panels, I realized that it would be nice to have a donor car. I was able to find one that had been sitting in a junkyard for many years. The car looked pretty decent, but the whole floor pan was rusted out from one end to the other, so I had to sacrifice this car in order to repair mine. It could have been restored, but it would have taken a lot of money. It was a two-door hardtop, but not a super sport. This car originally had a 327 in it. This car had most of the parts I needed to fix my car. One area that was going to require major work was the cowl. Luckily for me, they make this part aftermarket and I was able to buy it. Then I had to rebuild the windshield lip where the windshield sits at on the bottom because it does not come with the new cowl. So I was able to cut the sheet metal out of an extra quarter panel I had. I stitched welded it in just like you would do any body panel. With a little work and patience, it can be done. Next, I moved on to the rear quarter panels. I cut the quarter panels off where the other guy had messed them up. And then I cut the quarter panels off the parts car, and I was able to use a lot of the metal from the parts car. The parts car had some damage in one area, and I had to use some of the other sheet metal that came with the car when I bought it. I had to repair the inner fender wells because they had rusted out also. With all the metal work coming together, the car was starting to look like a 65 Impala again. I used an angle grinder with a wire brush on it to remove the paint on the car. I found that the fine bristle brush worked better than the coarse. As I mentioned earlier, the lower part of the cowl where the fender bolts on was totally gone on one side of the car and almost gone on the other side. I was able to cut these from the parts car and get it back to the way it looked from the factory. Another area of concern was around the rear window and the bottom lip where the window sits. There was a couple rust holes. I was able to repair them with sheet metal. Surprisingly, the floor pan of the car was very solid with only a couple small holes that were easily repaired. The car was now ready to put some epoxy primer on it, and I started reassembling the body. I then started doing some body work, and after a while I was actually able to start driving the car around some. All my hard work was starting to pay off. I didn't mention it earlier, but I completely went through the wiring harness pin by pin, removed and cleaned and made sure that there was no corrosion anywhere. When I reassembled the car, everything worked perfectly. I ended up replacing the fuse box with a marine fuse box that used a modern type push-in fuses. I drove the car around quite a bit while I was in this stage. I was just happy to have an old car again to be able to drive around. The whole purpose of me building this car was so I could drive it and enjoy it. I should have waited to last, but next I started working on the interior. I took the console out, completely detailed it and repainted the black parts of it, and then I started working on the seats. I disassembled the seats and removed everything from them, including the padding and the burlap. This is done by cutting the hog rings that held the upholstery on from the factory. After removing all the parts from the seat, I had a real nasty pile of, I don't know what it was. All I can tell you is this is where old car smell comes from. I took the frames out and cleaned them and painted them, and also the seat rails on the bottom. I cleaned them up completely and rebuilt them and greased them. The seat covers I used were made by PUI. Most of your vendors sell PUI seat upholstery. I replaced the sponges, the burlap, and the seat covers. Everything was brand new. That way there's no nasty stuff falling out the bottoms of the seat. The sponge gets so brittle from age that in my opinion, it's a necessity to change them. I was extremely pleased with the outcome of my seats. I had never reupholstered seats before, and these look really good, and the 65 design is so awesome. I then moved on and replaced the headliner. Also, it was not that hard to do. I had watched some YouTube videos on that. I also bought door panels and rear panels. These were also PUI. Most of your vendors carry PUI door panels. I'm fairly pleased with the PUI panels. I bought the fully assembled ones, which by the way are not fully assembled. You still have to put the metal rails on the bottom that push into the door. I then started doing the major body work, started block sanding and preparing the car for paint. It's then that I realized that my driver's side quarter panel was not good enough to use, so I went ahead and cut it off and bought a brand new quarter panel and installed it, and it made the job a lot easier. The block sanding took a long time, but everything I had read and watched said that was the most important part. So I block sanded it for probably a month and a half in my spare time, and I'm not a body man, never did this before, never painted a car before. But when it was all said and done, the car is really straight, and I'm happy with the results. After a lot of reading and a lot of videos, I then was ready to start painting. I didn't have a paint booth, so I painted the car in my driveway and in my garage. I realized this is not the best way to do it, but it's the best thing I had available to me. I painted the car disassembled, and it ended up matching very well. I knew I was going to have to do a lot of cutting and buffing, because when I painted the stuff in the garage, a lot of the clear coat clumped together and fell back down. So I had little specks all over it. But I put it on there thick enough that I could sand it down and then buff it out. It didn't take me long to learn that this was a lot of hard work, and the people who do it are really artists. My car came out pretty good, considering it was a greenhorn that did it. I have the utmost respect for the people that do this for a living, but by doing it myself, I saved myself a lot of money and a lot of time. It's easy to see why they charge so much. I couldn't even begin to count the hours that I spent working on this car. No wonder these cars are so expensive when you buy them already restored. But when this was all said and done, I had the satisfaction of knowing that I did this myself. I wanted me a car to ride around, and I didn't want to spend the money up front, so I did it myself. Now I've got exactly what I was looking for. Going into this, I had some pretty decent skills, mechanic skills, electrical skills, and I'd worked on cars most of my life, not professionally. And I think anybody who wants it bad enough and you have some money to spend can fix a car up themselves. You just got to be patient and persistent and realize you're going into it with a lot of hard work. Now, I love driving my car around. I like taking it to the local car shows, really enjoy it. I get compliments everywhere I go. I've gotten a lot of compliments from my videos online. So I thank God for the ability to build this car, and I thank my wife for sticking with me through the whole thing. And now I'm able to ride the car around and enjoy it. I get to spend time with my brothers. One of my brothers has a 66 Caprice, and the other brother has a 66 Chevelle Malibu. I also have now got the 67 Cadillac that belonged to my other brother. The pictures you see here was his very last ride that he took in it. He died of pancreatic cancer last year in October. So you'll be seeing videos. I've already been putting a lot of videos on here. Now I'm in the process of restoring the Cadillac. I bought it from him right before he passed away. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you have, thank you very much. Look out in the future for more do-it-yourself home auto restoration videos.